And with that, I'll welcome our first speaker. Annemarie Ward is the Chief Executive of Favour. Many of you will have attended the recovery walks organised each year by her organisation in very different times. But Favour is much more than those brilliant walks. It's a powerful advocacy organisation. And if you've met her or heard her speak, you'll know what a passionate advocate she is for treatment and support for people in addiction. She's relentless, and I'm delighted that she's going to speak to us today. Annemarie, 10 minutes.
Thank you, Karen. I don't think you'll have to correct me at any point today. I feel like I've got very little to say. Yep, my name is Annemarie and I am the CEO of Faces and Voices of Recovery UK. We are a professional advocacy organisation who are intent on educating not just the public, but also the professionals in this field about our ability to recover, if given the opportunities. We have 4,500 members across the UK at last count. I haven't counted since the pandemic. I also haven't had a day off since the pandemic, so I'm really looking forward to some time off. Our phones and social media channels have never been busier, with people asking and actually begging for help. I have never been so distressed at the amount of distressing calls, messages, tweets, Facebook messages that are coming to us. I've never seen the volume of people asking for help than what we're experiencing just now. Karen's quite right, you know, those wonderful walks that we do every year are and always were about organising and mobilising the recovery community. They were always about that. And we knew that we had quite a job to do, because traditionally that constituency of people who are in recovery not only often stay anonymous, but there's tremendous shame attached to being a person in recovery. There's also tremendous shame, as we know, attached to people who are suffering or who are overwhelmed with their substance or behavioural addiction use. So when we had that first walk in Liverpool in 2019 and 300 people turned up, we knew it was the start of something special. But just recently, certainly with the drug deaths numbers just increasing without any sort of real, what we felt was real outcry from the field, and real urgency from the field in general, we decided at board level to start to campaign. Our campaigning before that had always been about making recovery visible and celebrating recovery. And some, you know, people would refer to us as the Purple Balloon Brigade, you know, as a derogatory term, but we were really trying to show that recovery is possible, and we were trying to make that visible recovery impactful to the treatment community and to the culture of treatment, because the culture of recovery is something very, very different to the culture of treatment. And when people come into recovery, we absolutely expect them to get well. You know, we have hundreds, thousands, numerous examples of people who have overcome the most adverse trauma and life circumstances when they are given the right support. So there is an expectation from other people in recovery that people who start this journey can and do recover and can get well and heal from, more often than not, the trauma that first brought them to become overwhelmed. So as I said, our initial campaigning was based around those, you know, making recovery visible and trying to influence the culture of treatment to bring that same hope and expectation into the treatment world. We've been successful in some parts of the UK around that. Some regions, as you know, are, a lot of what we do is very broken up, postcode lottery, autonomous. So there's some areas more receptive to that than others. But in Scotland, we have found a very, very different attitude towards recovering people, to say the least. When we started to campaign using "You Keep Talking, We Keep Dying" as our hashline, we became something else as an organisation, and at our board meeting last Tuesday, we've decided we are going to renew our aims and objectives, because we have grown into something else, something that we really didn't want to become, if I'm perfectly honest. I would much rather be celebrating recovery rather than being a really, really agitated, upset and angry commentator about the state of our field. But unfortunately, that seems to be where my role is currently. One of the major things that we know from research is that when people do get access to the type of help that they need, and often that can be residential rehab, but so few people actually get access. Karen just highlighted some of those statistics there. Less than 0.655%, less than 1% of people in England. There's something about that. We've got to a point, I believe, in the addiction field in the UK, whereby our leadership, who I want to instill a sense of responsibility on our leadership to speak up and speak out about that. We have become so used to receiving the crumbs to serve our constituency of people. We've been so used to begging, and I don't just mean for residential rehab, I mean for community rehab, I mean for all resources in our field. We've become so used to cutting each other's throats in order to win tenders because of the way the system's set up, that we have got ourselves into a situation as a profession and as a field whereby there is nowhere near enough adequate resources to help people get well. There just isn't. Considering the extent of this problem, and considering that this problem will only be exacerbated, God knows how much by in the coming years because of the pandemic, we absolutely need to step up and step forward as leaders in this field to demand, campaign, pressure. I remember starting the charity and all those words were abhorrent to me. I did not want to pressure, campaign and demand. I thought there's better ways to do this. I'm left thinking, after our recent success of You Keep Talking, We Keep Dying, where we were relentless in our pressure on both Scottish Government, and we believe some of that pressure reached Westminster as well, and the result of the £255 million, unprecedented amount of investment in Scotland that came into this field. We believe that was as a result of our campaign and all the people who helped us. So, I am not adverse to saying I got it wrong. And I got it wrong when I thought we have to make recovery visible by being collaborative and celebrating and being nice and showing people how wonderful our lives are. I got that wrong. It was pressure and tenacity and the strength of our organisation and all those other people who supported us, the families who spoke up, who had the courage to speak about their grief, about losing their children, their mothers, their fathers. We platformed those people, we gave them a voice, and it was that changed, that brought in that investment, and we need to do more of that as a field. I absolutely 100% believe we need to do more of that. One of the things that really strikes me about our field is, when we think about cancer or heart disease and being able to help people halt that progression at the early stages. Residential rehab has traditionally been for those who have tried everything else. And what I would like to see in my lifetime would be people who are at the very beginnings of stages of addiction, because we know from the research that it's trauma primarily that gets us there, right? So we don't have to wait until our people have tried every other area of treatment. That trauma will be there at the very start of their illness, at the very start of the progression of this condition. It will be there in 20 years' time as well, once they've tried everything else and they've put more trauma on their trauma. In my lifetime, I would like to see us as a field understanding that this is a progressive condition, that we can catch it in the early stages, and that we can help people heal and get well when they first start getting into trouble. That's what I would like to see for residential rehab, that not only that it becomes available, because, you know, let's face it, the current provision is, the word inadequate is inadequate. I would like to see everybody who is suffering, and trust me, I love the quote from, and I'll finish on this, from Confessions of an Opium Eater, and I can never quote anything, but he points in that book, he says something about, you will have no idea that you know, how much I suffer. You know, the fools who look on, they have no idea how much I suffer. And in my recent conversations with people who are like me, have over 2 decades of recovery, my friends who I've grew up with and who have sustained their recoveries for, like, as I said, 2, sometimes 3 decades, we have been concluding recently that, you know, this field actually does not recognise not only the tenacity, the resilience and the absolute determination that it takes to continue to recover, but this field generally denies how much suffering we actually are in and how much it takes to heal. So at the very least, what we are taught in residential rehab, and by the way, that was not my path, and I think we're one of the few organisations who can say we have no vested interest other than to advocate for the people who are suffering. That residential rehab is one of the surefire ways for us to start to deal with that trauma that got us into the mess that we end up in the first place. And I will leave it there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Annemarie. As ever, really clear demonstration of the power of advocacy, and a call to action from you. So thank you. I'm going to move on to our next speaker. That's Shead. She's the Chief Executive of Trevi, which is a women's charity in Devon, which provides, amongst other services, a residential treatment service for women and children. She's also the chair of Choices, which is a group of independent residential treatment providers. And one of the lovely things that has happened through the pandemic has been the opportunity for many of us to come together like we never have before. It's been a real pleasure to work more closely with Hannah and others from across the residential treatment sector over the last year to make sure that residential treatment could stay open safely. So Hannah, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Right, I'm going to very boldly attempt to share my screen here, so bear with me. Okie. Right, so I'll just keep an eye on the time here. So I guess just to sort of start by saying I'm wearing a couple of hats today. I'm here as Chief Executive of Trevi. Hopefully people have heard of Trevi. We've been around for 28 years and we've got three services. Our residential service that I hope people will be familiar with is Trevi House, now renamed as Jasmine, but we began as Trevi House, and that's a residential rehab that works with women and their children. So we take up to 10 women with their children to support the mums to get drug and alcohol free. So I'm wearing my Trevi hat, but I'm also wearing my Choices hat. So Choices Rehab we're a group of about 17 independent residential rehabs that have come together over the years to try and work together, support one another. And I guess, as Annemarie was saying, we never set out to sort of campaign, but sometimes I think we sort of find ourselves drifting into it because actually there's a real need for it in the field at the moment. So I was asked to give a bit of a sort of a snapshot of residential rehab the last 5 years. And I guess what I wanted to start by saying is that there's two sides to it. I think there are some real challenges that I absolutely want us to talk about, and there have been some really, really tough days, but there's also been some really good stuff that's been happening. I think it's important for us to recognise both. But to start with some of the challenges, and for me, when I was putting this slide together, it was quite hard hitting actually, because we've lost a lot of expertise over the years to this field, this sector. It's lost, and the only way I can describe it is so many years of expertise. City roads, 41 years. And I'm sure those of us that have been around for a long time will remember sort of, referring clients into some of these centres that are now gone. And for me, that's sort of that change in the landscape. It feels, it's quite seismic. And I suppose there's a permanence to it, because even if more rehabs open, we've lost some of this expertise, and it really saddens me. This, for me, when I was putting this slide together, it was powerful. And being based in Plymouth, when Broadreach closed, that changed what the treatment options for people living here in Plymouth. It has changed in the southwest. We've lost sort of that access to recovery. So yeah, that's been a real sort of theme over the last few years. Rehab centres closing, and I guess then that sort of question: well, do we need them? Is there a need? And Karen rightly said, we're no longer, thankfully, having those sort of conversations about, is it rehab? Is it community treatment? And I think we all recognise that not everyone going into treatment will need residential rehab. We know that some people make a natural recovery without going into treatment at all. That's not the question. But I guess we know that there will be a proportion of people that do need to be able to access rehab. And that statistic that Karen raised at the beginning, we've seen that proportion dip over time. It's a steady year-on-year decrease over the last 5 years, and as someone who's sort of running residential, that really worries me to see that proportion, which to begin with was always a very small proportion of people going into rehab. To see that in essence almost to have is a real worry. So I asked my Choices colleagues, sort of bit of a snapshot, what have been your challenges over the last 5 years? And occupancy, that came up time and time again, and sort of, just to own my challenge. Occupancy, I think when you sort of run residential, it's the thing that you never stop sort of worrying about and being challenged by. But it's not the only thing, not the only challenge we're sort of dealing with. Complexity, we are working with increasingly complex clients, and of course that's what we're here to do. So I don't think for 1 minute that's not the challenge, because we're here for complex clients, but we're trying to do it against a backdrop of decreased resources. Some of the challenges around CQC, I think we've worked really hard and we've built good better relations with the CQC, better understanding of the sector. But when we're looking at trying to sort of work with more complex clients, that's physical complexity, mental health, there can sometimes be a bit of a tension that can make that, challenging. Unsurprisingly, some of the issues around the tender process, which absolutely I think that isn't just residential services, that's something that services in the community experience as well. But what we want to do is see a process that's a bit more streamlined, and it's been great to have been part of some conversations recently that hopefully is trying to sort of get some better solutions. So what about that sort of change in occupancy? Well, it's not just, I guess, the sort of, a figment of our imagination or just a sort of theoretical concern. Yes, occupancy is declining, and if we look over the last 5 years, we can see quite a sort of a stark decrease, 30% dip. And then if we look, well, what does it look like this year? That trend is sadly still continuing. We're still seeing that sort of that decrease in the number of clients that are actually getting to access rehab. One of the sort of challenges that we often talk about it in healthcare more widely, but certainly in residential, that idea about the postcode lottery. And certainly something that I see at Trevi, we've got some local authorities that we have got very established relationships with, and we know that if you live in some areas, you've got a really sort of good chance of coming into treatment with your child. There are some areas where that won't happen. I guess that's something that when we think about access to treatment being equitable, being fair, being based on clinical need, it's a real worry to think that actually where you live will still make a difference about whether or not you might access treatment. I also asked my sort of colleagues at Choices, I said, what's on your worry list when you wake up at sort of, 3 in the morning, what are you worried about? Occupancy is still there. It is something, I think, we had a Choices meeting about 3 years ago now, and one of the sort of colleagues around the table said, I wonder who won't be here in a year. And they were right. One of the rehabs who sat in the meeting, they weren't there a year later. So yes, it's something that worries us. COVID, recovering from COVID, and I've heard a couple of times the tenor phrase returning to better, and I really like that. But COVID has had a huge impact on our sector and how we deliver and how we keep services open and safe. And unsurprisingly, that's still a sort of worry and concern for those of us running residential services. And also funding. And I think one of the things I love about this sector is the agility and the sort of the response that people in residential have. And so many of certainly the Choices group are looking at different ways to make sure we can still work with people. So whether that's bursary schemes, sponsored beds, but what it means is we're having to fundraise and we're having to really creatively try and find other ways so that we can keep these bed spaces and we can keep serving the vulnerable clients that need us, that need treatment, that need that opportunity to have a recovery. But as I say, it's not, yes, we've had so many challenges, but there's also some real positives, and I just wanted to highlight those quickly. And the collaboration in this sector, the last 5 years, I think I've really witnessed how well residential rehabs are working together. I've seen it through the Choices Rehab group, that sharing of best practice. With CQC, people really reaching out to other colleagues to say, look, this is a policy, work this way, let's improve practice together. And through doing that, it's raising standards. So what we're seeing is that for people coming into treatment, they're getting better outcomes. And any of those of you that are in the meeting today that might have referred into one of the Choices groups and may have seen the treatment loop. And the treatment loop is something we do together, where if a placement is maybe breaking down in one rehab, we offer the referrer and the client that opportunity to be placed somewhere else in the network. So that collaboration, it makes a difference for the people we're serving, the clients we're working with. And I think nowhere have we seen that more than COVID. And Karen said it's not just been sort of within some of the Choices rehabs, it's been more wider. It has been great to work with Karen, to work with some of the rehabs, to work with Public Health England as well, and to be able to sort of move away. Sometimes I think residential rehab, we're seen as that sort of house on the hill looking inwards, and that no longer is the case. I think there's a real desire to look outwards and work with the wider treatment sector. I had to sort of just share this slide. It's something that we've been talking about in my organisation, because yes, the last year's been really hard, it's been really tough, but actually morale is really high. And why is that? And I remember when I first went for the job at Trevi someone said to me, if you want to be well at work, work in rehab. And I have to say that working in residential, there's a real, I guess, you have a sense of purpose. See the impact you're making. You do get that chance to really see people make that recovery, and you work with people who are also really part of that sense of purpose, that sense of mission. And so yes, there are so many challenges and so many things that sort of we're battling with in the sector, but the people working within it are that sort of agility and resilience together, I think, is really giving us that opportunity to be part of the solution. And certainly when we talk about that returning to better from COVID, I think there's a really something we can tap into through residential rehab to really sort of have that offer. And hopefully I'll sort of get to my question.
Thank you, Hannah. Apologies, everyone. The sound was a bit distorted through there, but I didn't want to stop you in your stride, and I'm not sure there's very much that you could have done about it anyway. So, yeah, thank you. Apologies, everybody, for the sound, but as somebody said in the chat, the slides were really good, and we're able to clearly show your presentation. So I will move on to Andy Symons, who is Senior Service Manager from Turning Point in Oxford. And whilst the national statistics speak for themselves in terms of some of the blocks and barriers to access residential treatment and detox provision across the country, there are examples of new residential pathways being created. And I'm glad that we've been able to invite Andy to share the Oxford example with us today. Andy, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Many thanks for inviting me to come along and present some stuff to you today. Right, let's just try and get my presentation up. Hopefully you can all see that. Sorry.
Andy, while you're doing that, if I can
there
just encourage everybody to continue to keep their questions in the Q&A. So some are going in the chat, that's fine. I think Oliver will move those into the Q&A, but if you can put your questions in the Q&A, we can and indicate who you'd like to answer them. We'll get to that after Andy's presentation. Andy, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm the Senior Operations Manager and the CQC Registered Manager for Turning Point in Oxfordshire. I have worked in community services now, crikey, I lost count at 25 years. So yeah, for quite a few years. And I just want to share with you a little bit about our experiences in Oxfordshire, the challenges and the opportunities, and particularly give an overview from a community service about what we provide. We changed our residential and detox pathway a couple of years ago, which we found very kind of helpful. I want to talk a little bit about our experience, particularly in COVID-19 and how that's kind of affected us, particularly with our use of residential and detox pathway. And then also talk a little bit about specifically about that collaboration, which you've spoken about as well, and about that is kind of help for us as well. So just to tell you a little bit about Oxfordshire very, very quickly, we kind of got 4 treatment hubs, got about 100 staff, got a large nursing team, psychologists, the usual kind of bit, peer mentors. We've got about almost 1,500 people in treatment with ourselves. We do got a large share care of 26 kind of practices. We've got a dedicated alcohol service, 580 people coming through that, non-OUs. We've done a lot about low threshold prescribing in recent years, a kind of engagement approach, and also about kind of reduction days as well, about that stepping stone to residential of those who most need it. We do an awful lot of outreach and in-reach in terms of homelessness, so particularly in terms of COVID-19. We're there Monday to Friday every single day. We started a new family safeguarding with workers, 17 workers embedded within children's social cares, working with families with either on child protection or SIM plans. We do an awful lot of community outreach as well. We do a lot of collaboration, you know, particularly in mental health. We're very, very lucky to have a kind of AMHT consultant who works within our service. Our psychologist works within mental health. We've done an awful lot around criminal justice. Very, very, very proud that I think we've treated almost 200 people for Hep C treatment in recent years in drug treatment and community settings, and particularly relevant for the alcohol detox pathway. Lots of referrals from hospital liaison team there as well. We also like fluffy bits as well. So, you know, we do have a refresh CAF. We have a number of from Spring Hill Prison who are on day release with us. We have a recovery house where people coming back from residential treatment live in that kind of second stage housing. Big peer mentoring, and also something called Growing Our Community, about getting people to kind of the recovery capital, doing stuff in the community as well. So Oxfordshire, just in terms of our kind of framework here, so we have a tier 4 framework. We have about 15 detox people on our framework, just a bit more on the rehab. It's overseen by public health. They have the budget within that. We also have a local 12-week assisted withdrawal program unit as well in Oxford. And we have a virtual funding panel, which meets kind of fortnightly. So we do all the residential applications and we send them through for kind of agreement there. We did a change probably a couple of years ago. We used to have a very kind of traditional kind of community care roles in the service. We had a couple of separate community care assessors, also an admin. It was very much set on a kind of traditional formal reviews. And I suppose we looked at it, it was kind of clunky. It was very time consuming. We found that service users, there were lots and lots of hoops to jump through. And we had that very traditional kind of, you have to use community first before you get through to residential. And I suppose generally it was a very linear model where we did the outreach, you came through community, then went through to residential, and then you went on. And to be honest, it wasn't very good. I think we kind of looked at ourselves and thought the people who most needed residential treatment weren't necessarily the people getting through, and it was more a question of people who can actually go through the process rather than their kind of need, really. So a couple of years ago, we, you know, all staff now can meet complete community treatment applications. We have a very kind of clear package agreed with service users at the top. In our former model, we used to wait for a kind of at the they do their detox in their primary phase. At 8 weeks, we do another review with them, and then the poor service user was left whether they're going to get an extension to that or not get an extension. So that was kind of not great in terms of that. I suppose now we're a lot more about thinking about what happens before the residential treatment and what happens afterwards. You know, very much looking at the evidence. I think increasingly it's about working with partners with us, not just around the drugs and alcohol. And for me, it's about reducing those waiting times. Particularly for people kind of spending months going through a process. And for us, I suppose it's having a collective responsibility. I want all my staff to understand residential treatment. I want them all to understand and experience that sending service users. And I think someone mentioned earlier on, when people do well, it is one of the best feelings that you can have. We do have, crikey, got 100 staff. The deputy ops manager, he oversees the process, yeah, puts a lot of effort into it. So just in terms of what's happened to us, I just wanted to kind of look, particularly since COVID. So from April to December last year, we had 111 opiate successful completions in the community. We did 52 alcohol community detox as well in the community. We have a representation rate of about 4% in terms of opiates. It's not just about getting people out the service. It is those longer term kind of sustaining the recovery as well. Within that kind of 9-month period, we made 85 placements in all. So generally, We make 2 or 3 every single week. So this was just as the first kind of COVID commenced. At any one time, we have probably about 25 people in residential treatment. We got a very lovely performance manager. She used to drive everyone to residential treatment. In the last year, we've got a couple of residentials who send taxis. But I can tell you, I think I've spent almost 20 grand on taxis in the last 9 months, just ensuring people kind of get to kind of treatment. We also do, we started something, a criminal justice pathway. We noticed that particularly people going from prison and criminal justice have particularly poor outcomes in terms of that. And we had a very lovely judge in Oxford who we attend the Crown Court every week. We have about 76 people on a DRR, and put together a kind of a new pathway, which was about how we link community in through prison, which is our local prison, Bullingdon Prison, and through to residential, and then back into the community again. So I think we've sent 7 people. You know, it's a real collaboration where the judge reviews them every single month. They go to Bullingdon. It's just about how you make joined up care really kind of effective, really, and therefore the prison works with us. It's very much about establishing a kind of plan for each service user. But this year we sent 7 people through, really kind of people with kind of offending history and also substance misuse. We had someone go on Monday, one of the IOM police officers drove them there, but it's a real thing which is not just into kind of residential but back into the community as well. Rough sleepers, we sent 25 people from the Oxford emergency accommodation. I think we've had 31 kind of packages, so people have gone back, can go back again. I think for me it's about kind of capturing that moment for people. I can remember one person called Johnny we had just as COVID was starting. He was drinking probably between 1 bottle and 2 bottles of vodka a day. He was begging up the money, and once that all kind of disappeared, he was put into a Premier Inn, and it was sitting down and saying to him, you know, why not now? Why don't we actually put you forward for a residential treatment option? And as ever, most people with our homelessness, they get kitted out with lots of things from Sports Direct. Other sporting stores are available, toiletries and stuff. And, you know, he went along and we've had 25. And I think particularly with rough sleepers, it is thinking about what that looks, and it is very much around practicalities and about how you can actually work with people to kind of create that aspiration. We also have a number of specialist off-panel placements as well. Obviously mother and baby, particularly since we started doing our family solutions kind of work. Dual diagnosis, we had someone go yesterday with autism. We had to work very much with a couple of residential about how we become autism friendly, how we would understand his needs. He went yesterday and doing very well. And I think just in terms of complexity, you mentioned earlier on, you know, I would say the people we are sending are more complex there, but I don't think they've got more complex in the service. I think we're just better at matching residential treatment with those who most need it, rather than having to kind of go through community failing and almost it being the last ditch kind of attempt, really. And I think generally COVID has been really difficult, I think, in a challenging time. But I think, you know, I have seen, for someone who's been around forever and a day, some people I would think who probably some of the most complex, difficult situations they were in, really having some fantastic outcomes, and it is really inspiring when that happens. Just a kind of last bit, I suppose these are a bit about what works for us in Oxfordshire, what works for us is in a community. I think for us, it was about having that fresh approach, trying to lose all the stuff I'd done for previous decades. It's about having bespoke care package for each individual. You know, I'm a great advocate. How do I make treatment attractive for the people who most need it, those rough sleepers, those families, those in the criminal justice system? And I think it's all our kind of responsibility to ensure that we can attract people into treatment and that treatment is effective. I think it's a little bit about kind of service user aspirations. I think working with people who often have decades within the kind of chaos, within that kind of addiction, about how do we ensure that the services fits into their needs rather than expecting the service users to kind of fit in with our needs and our pathways. I think it's really important. You know, the person I told you a minute ago, Johnny, you know, he actually did, after being on the streets for 20 years, literally had the clothes he was standing up with. You know, he was there for 5 months, did really well. Then went missing. We did get a call from an ED department. I'd like to say Stockport. It was somewhere up north. We had to go and pick him up. He brought him back. He actually went back into the pathway, but, you know, a month later, he went back again, and we gave it another go. And I think sometimes we do need to think a little bit differently about alcohol, you know, because it is very, very different. And the way I would look at it, I didn't see it as a failure. He did 5 months, and for someone like that, it was fantastic. And hopefully this time he will do longer. The other bit, just to say, collaboration. We love working with services who want to work with us, and I think that's a real difference for us. As Hannah said, it is a real partnership now, I think we have with residentials. When people go there, service users, we do talk to them every single week. We do, you know, some services, residential, have been absolutely fantastic, particularly within COVID-19, coming up with kind of imaginative kind of plans and to do what we can to kind of ensure that people kind of stay within that. The next one I would say is solution flow focused, flexibility. We had someone last month, actually it was in January, who turned up to a residential treatment detox. He came by taxi. He was moving on. He took the whole of his flat with him in the taxi, and we got this call from the residential and said he's even got the kitchen table in the taxi. What do we do? Did you not tell him he couldn't bring his kitchen table? It's like, well, I looked on the form as well, not really, but they said, I said, well, is there any way you can get it stored? And yeah, we get somewhere for £20. Okay, we'll pay the £20, and they stored his furniture there until he was finished. And it is the little practical bits which happen, which I think make such an impact on service users coming through. I think there's some stuff about joint ownership, about working together builds trust. You know, there are lots of times now where we try to do whether service users come through and we've had to ring up somewhere and say, can we have an admission date? And that trust that we will get all the paperwork. The GP summary will be there, the mental health summary will be there. We do lots of alcohol testing and stuff, but there is very much more of a joint kind of approach, rather than, well, as a community you do this, the residential does that, and the bit about the joint ownership, it enables the service user to be at the heart of the kind of process, really. The next one, investments pay dividends. I try to use less of a capitalist kind of thing, but it kind of fitted, really. You know, it does take time, it does take money. You know, we are very fortunate in Oxfordshire, where I do think we're well funded in terms of residential treatment. It takes an awful lot of time, particularly for people who can kind of make decisions. I think for us, you know, we had someone on Christmas Eve where they got kicked out of somewhere. And as you were talking, Hannah, about that treatment loop, we managed to get him somewhere else on Christmas Eve. You know, sometimes some of the people we are sending can be kind of fairly kind of complex in terms of their behavior, but it was kind of fantastic. And we have got someone 24/7, you know, who can take those calls. We had a call on Christmas Day and had to sort something out for 4 hours. We had a call last night at 9 o'clock, but there is very much that kind of joint kind of approach, I would say. And lastly, just on this one, I suppose it's about, for us, about the service users' outcomes. You know, we are talking about lasting, sustained recovery that goes on, that breaks often decades of addiction onto building the new life. You know, I had a very lovely story with someone who was transferred to us with a horrendous number of benzos from a local GP. He was on my caseload for a while, just shows you what it was like. He came in, he shouted at me quite a bit. He shouted at the clinical lead. His dad came in, shouted at us quite a lot. But in the end, we kind of reduced him a little bit. He went down to, I think it was Broadway Lodge then, and successfully completed. And he gives me a call every year now, just to say he's doing an access course now. And I think for us, you know, it's understanding people's, you know, sustaining that bit, which is fantastic. And we do get those those lovely little bits. Someone stopped me on Christmas Eve. I had my mask on in Tesco's buying my Christmas dinner. Someone else, he also went through the pathway. He was there in his kind of painting overalls and just said, I just want to thank you for what, you know, what the service has done. And I said, well, it's you that's done it, and it's great to see you doing so well. And then lastly, I just want to leave you a few little pictures, really. You know, this is what makes us smile. So all these people are happy for me to share their story with them. On the left, we've got Ripon and Matt and Gary are in our recovery house. They've all been through the residential treatment pathway. Ripon was through the criminal justice pathway, and them doing some kind of training. We've got someone on the bottom left there who we do a very kind of clappy kind of graduation thing from people who do well in the service. There's one of our homeless people there going off to residential treatment in a taxi. On the tap right there, we got Andrea, who did really, really well and had a very, very, very traumatic, who's been back now probably 6 months and working. She's a peer mentor in the service. She's there working at kind of in one of our kind of meet and greet areas. And on the bottom right, the person in the middle was a bloke called Izzy. He was a crack and heroin user, experienced of cookering, went through the residential treatment pathway, came back to be a peer mentor with us now, and now he's our Hep C Trust peer advocate, and, you know, was there back in during COVID when we were doing Hep C treatment in the emergency accommodation with our lovely hepatology team. And then just to leave you with a lovely picture there in the middle, which was sent to me by one of the directors of Children's Social Care with a very tricky situation with a family who, by working together, we managed to sort out. And she just sent me an email with a picture of Elvis saying, thank you very much. And that is what we can do together, really. Is that about 10 minutes?
And a bit, Andy, but never mind.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you, Andy. And I thought it was important that we did get some insight into some areas within the country that are developing really, really good pathways. We're going to come on to questions in a minute, and we've got quite a few. I'm going to sort of bring them together because there's some common themes that are coming through them. But the pathway that Andy described is not unique in England. There's not many, but it's not unique, and it's certainly not unique across the UK. And there's some common features of those pathways that seem to be supporting a reasonable sort of route through to residential treatment and detox. Andy talks about sort of the pre and post rehab focus. Also talked about that care management as people move through rehab, not making sure that they can stay connected. And that brings me on to the first question, which I'm going to pose to all three of you. And there are many sort of coming at this from many different angles in the questions that have been posted. But it's about the role of providers, community providers, in supporting that pathway. And many people in attendance have sort of come from different perspectives on that. How can providers support that? What are the blocks in terms of views of people working in community services, and how as a sector can we come together more effectively to support that? I think, who wants to go first? Shall I go to Andy first? Then I'll come to you, Annemarie, then Hannah.
Thanks, Karen. I think for us, I suppose, you know, I've been around a long time, really, and I suppose the longer I work in community services, the less bit I'm looking for a model or a pathway, which is gonna, for me, it's about the service user, it's about the individual, it's about understanding them. And for me, it's very important that everyone within my service, the managers, the fact we have the deputy ops, the fact I know a lot of those service users, is about how we see it, rather than just being a process and a path within the service, is that we can actually put service users at the middle of that. I think, you know, the fact that we have all workers now doing assessments has had a really big benefit. The assessments aren't, we have to do something on quality because some of it can be a little bit kind of complicated. But, you know, for workers, for each each worker to have that success or to work with someone to see them coming through has a big impact. And, you know, having a little bit less of that linear kind of approach where this is the step and you do this, you do that, you know, it is now people can actually just come to us, and depending on what their situation is, could go straight to residential treatment if that's what they need, because trauma is there, some of the bits, and let's not spend 12 months just reinforcing kind of that failure, but let's do. But I think it is that aspirational stuff, and I think that's for all of us, and I think it is about celebrating that success. And it's truly one of the nicest things. We did something on the bloke who was kind of, we put little people up and stuff when they do well, and we all give them a bit of a clap. It's not very much like me probably for an ode, and I said to him, I said, you know, he said, I feel a bit of a Burke, mate. He said, I feel really great, but he said it feels really nice. And I think it brings a real understanding, which is less about us and about our treatment pathways, less about my CQC things, but it puts people back at that centre. And it fascinates me why some people change and take that leap. And to me, it's a real privilege to be able to kind of share that moment with them.
The power of a push-up, Andy. Annemarie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Karen. Yeah, I mean, I've run out of patience now. I've got no patience left. There's too many people dying round about me, and I love what Will Pearson says in the chat about Oxfordshire sending over 100 people to rehab and other local authorities sending no one. Can we name and shame? I think we need to, and I think Favour UK have got a vital role in doing that. You know, like just in the last couple of days, we've heard Glasgow Health and Social Care Partnership and North Lanarkshire Health and Social Care Partnership say that there's no demand for rehab. You know, I genuinely think that I've got no other explanation for this other than they must despise people who are suffering from addiction, because there is no rational explanation for that, given that we've just been, you know, awarded £20 million for residential rehab in Scotland. Like I said, I've got no more patience for this. I want to swear, but I won't. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Annemarie. Sorry, I wrote down the word aspiration as well, Andy. You mentioned it, and I remember when I think it's not the current person in charge of CQC, the person beforehand, who said about care homes, what would you want if it was your nan going into a care home? And I think from a sort of, when we're looking at addiction services, what would you want if it was your sister walking into treatment? What would your aspiration be for them? And yes, we aren't going to do the, you know, are we harming, are we abstinence? But what do we want for people? And we want to be able to hold a bit of aspiration and hold a bit of hope, and to not make any choices ourselves about what someone's future could look like. And certainly when we've done pieces of work in our organisation, asking people what made a difference to you in your treatment journey, nearly every single time it's someone that believed in them somewhere along the way. And that is often a drug worker, but someone who just saw something in them that they couldn't see themselves and held that bit of hope and held that bit of aspiration. And I think, you know, I'd like to change some of the conversations we have within services to have a bit more aspiration for the people that we're working with, and wanting for them the things that we would want if it was our own friends and family walking through the doors of treatment services.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for the questions that you've posted. Those that we have been able to answer in this first panel, I think some of them will be quite pertinent for the second panel. So I'm going to move on to the second panel, and as the conversation is sort of moving that way anyway, we're going to be looking at now what can we do? What can we do to improve access to residential treatment and to detox provision? And our first speaker is Pete Burkinshaw. He's the alcohol and drug treatment lead at PHE, and many of you will know Pete. As well as supporting the sector's response to the pandemic over the last year, he's also been supporting the Dame Carol Black Phase 2 review. And that, together with the changes announced to PHE last year, has meant life has, for Pete, I'm sure, been a tad taxing. So I'm very pleased that he's managed to create some time for us today. So Pete, over to you.
Sorry, I've spent the last year talking on mute and yeah, it's stopped being funny, to be honest. Anyway, thank you for giving me space to talk to you today. Am I sharing my screen? Is that up? Karen's nodding, great. Just let me get it on Annemarie and then I can get going. Okay. Right, so what am I going to talk to you about today? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we got here, but it's important that we kind of, I don't want to over dwell on that, but I think it is important just to understand it, to understand the way forward. I'm going to talk briefly about the new the 80 million additional treatment funding that's been announced by the government and how that can help Tier 4. I'll talk briefly about Dame Carol Blacken's wider system reform and then finish with sort of my contribution to what I think is the way ahead and reasons to be cheerful. So how we got here, some reflections. I think it's really important to understand it as a systems issue. As has already been mentioned, that the causes for where we are in relation to Tier 4 are really complex and multiple. And this is just a few of them, to be completely honest. You know, if I'd have spent longer thinking about it, I could have come up with a longer list. But obviously, you know, funding cuts are absolutely central to all of this. But as someone kind of more observant to me has said, what's actually happened is sort of a collapse into the middle. So what we've lost is everything at kind of at both sides in terms of the more innovative, community-based, perhaps sometimes often peer-led grassroots organisations, smaller charities, but also at the other end in terms of you know, medical input, professionalised workforce, psychologists in the sector. So it's kind of regressed into the middle. So it's not one part of the system that's been affected by the cuts. Obviously, accountability has been a key issue. You know, we're at a pinnacle of localism. There is very little accountability between the local and the national, but also I think massively reduced accountability within systems. So between partners and between different parts of the system. And I think there's also been a loss of plurality within systems. So things have often migrated to single prime providers, and that loss of I can't say it. Why have I put a word on the side that I can't say today? The loss of that has obviously been, and I think that's a root of the problem as well. Localism, there's just been a huge diversity of visions and diversity of what is good. And I think the way forward in the future is going to be a much more simple boiling down to very, very simple standards. I have conversations with commissioners who think, well, you know, who say, you know, we're putting our money on community detox and we think that's the way forward. And, you know, with little regard for the evidence base on that, for the need that some people are just going to need an inpatient detox. And to be perfectly honest, the levers and the mechanisms to challenge that and regulate that are just not there by design. So the next one is probably more of a challenging one, but you know, I know this gets said a lot. It wasn't said by me originally, but I've stuck with it. We are quite good at circling the wagons and then shooting in. And I think to be honest, we did do that. And I think we kind of lacked a unified and coherent lobby. I'm the person who often talks to people after they've been lobbied, and sometimes they're confused, and sometimes they're perplexed that we're all trying to attack each other. And I think we've really got to, you know, think about that. And then the last point in there is this is a complex and multifaceted problem with complex and multifaceted solutions, and everyone's right. but everyone's wrong when they're absolute. And I think Karen alluded to that earlier on, that, you know, we have to live with the fact that we all have a contribution and that every part of the system is valid and is right. And until we kind of get singing on to that tune, we're going to confuse people. There was significantly reduced improvement support. You know, the capacity of PHE has not been, in my view, I can say all these things because we've been abolished, has not been, has not been as present and sufficient as it should be. And, you know, the changes to commissioning and commissioning structures, you know, the move towards prime providers, I think has affected this sector particularly. I think regional commissioning is almost extinct, and that has clearly had a massive effect on inpatient commissioning, and the cumulative effect, you know, that can't be blamed on recent history. That's been going on for a long time, but I think it's had a profound effect, the cumulative effect of marketisation. I'm going to speed up now because I've got to run out of time. This additional 80 million is a kickstart, but it's really not the solution. It is the biggest increase for 15 years. It is quite unprecedented in the current financial climate. So we should be, you know, really pleased and really positive about it, but it is only for 1 year. Yeah, and just to make the point that it is in addition to what is already spent, and we're doing what we can to ensure that and make sure that it's protected. So we're separating it into 3 separate grants. There's a universal component, an accelerator component, and an inpatient component. I'll talk mostly about the universal and the inpatient. The accelerator I won't dwell on, but that's really an additional 5 local areas in addition to the ADA areas, which is a pilot of intensive, coordinated, system-wide treatment and criminal justice and enforcement interventions. I'm not going to talk much about those. So let's just move on to the universal. So very shortly, you know, we'd have hoped already, but there are quite difficult technical delays, but we're going to get to local authorities with their universal allocation. That's going to be the majority of the funding. It's going to be around about 55 million. It'll be allocated by a formula, and there'll be a menu of interventions which they select from. And the aim of it is that the Prime Minister and the Treasury and Minister's main aim is that it's focused on crime, but also on drug-related deaths. And I'll talk more about that at the end. There's going to be a menu of interventions which local authorities will be asked to commission against. And as you can see, their increased use of residential rehabilitation is very firmly and squarely on that menu of interventions. So just a bit more detail about the universal and rehab. So they'll be given their money, they'll be given the menu of interventions, they'll be asked to make a return to us, which will ask them to plan how they're going to spend the money and on what. So as I said, it's on the menu, and subject to local need, they'll be able to make additional placements to residential rehab in 2021. And they'll be guided, it will be an indicative guidance, but they'll be guided to spend about 15% of their allocation on residential rehab. And also significantly, there's a very limited monitoring framework that we're attaching to this. It's all going to be through NDTMS because we're mindful of the burden and the timescales and all the rest of it. But through NDTMS, we're going to have a limited monitoring framework, and the number of RR placements is a part of that monitoring framework. And there's only going to be about 5 or 6 items on it. So as I said before, we're sort of breaking out a section of the funding to specifically focus on detox. I'm not going to dwell on why, but fundamentally it's a very broken component of the system. We're seeing more and more people held in the community and not being detoxed because they're too complex. We're seeing more and more people being admitted to hospital and having emergency unplanned detox and then relapse immediately afterwards, particularly in relation to alcohol. And we're also seeing people transferred from medically monitored inpatient detox into medically managed because they're just too unwell. All of this is obviously highly traumatic, just, you know, a million miles away from being cost effective and nonsensical. The priority is going to be on medically managed as opposed to monitored, because that is where we've seen the most closures, and that's where the provision is most scarce. It's not exclusively for medically managed, but that is our very, very clear stated priority, and we'll expect local areas to have plans that address medically managed provision. We're effectively going to ask them to look at what they've got available in their areas already and make better use of that, and then think about how they can expand capacity, but obviously mindful that doing all of that in a year is not going to be, it's not going to be the entire solution, but at least we aim to hope to start shifting the conversation, shifting the thinking, and fundamentally we're asking people to work on a regional or sub-regional or an integrated care system footprint, but think about it more broadly than on a single local authority level, and we're asking for plans on that basis. And we're also saying that pre and post detox support will be a planning requirement. I'm running out of time, but Dame Carol Black, so just to update you where we are with that, so she's going to be reporting to ministers very soon, and the plan is to publish just after Easter. It is only recommendations to government, so it will be key. We need you all to engage to make sure that government's held to account to implement those recommendations. Key to what she will be recommending will be reform to accountability and leadership, right through from national through to local, additional resources, reform to commissioning and kind of how partnerships function, workforce and quality. And then the next spending review is going to be really key with all of this, but I'm not going to lie to you, that's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough spending review. But I think we're potentially in good shape for it. And also broader public health and NHS reform is also going to be key to what happens next. And there are lots of other moving parts. But what seem to be sort of key themes from both those things are accountability and the role of marketisation. And I think that they're both helpful things for our sector. So just to conclude, sorry, Karen, I know my watch is buzzing at me. So the way forward and reasons to be cheerful and also realistic. So the 80 million is a kickstart. There is really good cross-government engagement at the moment in the need for system reform, but I'm not going to say it's all going to be straightforward, but we are, it's not like anything I've seen for 15 years. NHS and public health reform provides opportunity, as I've mentioned. So the solution for this sector, I think, it lies in broader system reform, but with a detailed focus on Tier 4. And there is appetite to do that. And there is also good commitment from Dame Carol in her recommendations, but also from the cross-government group that's working on this, that there will be proper engagement with the sector in development of the detail, because that is all yet to come. I think we need to unify, or you need to unify as a sector for functioning systems, and your lobbying needs to be purposeful and coherent and keep it simple. And you need to see the big picture and stay pragmatic. And that's code for that crime still gets more traction in government. It may be not what you want, but it'll be what brings the money. Spirals, not cycles. It won't go back to what it was. Things don't go, there are cycles, but they're spirals more than cycles. It will be an evolution and a change. I think we will see a waning of localism and an increase of accountability, but it won't be what it was before. There needs to be a rebalance between, local determination is obviously massively important, but there needs to be a rebalancing with a national framework. And just, as I've already said, the next spending review is going to be tough, but I think we are in good shape. Thanks.
Thank you, Pete. Lots of questions coming in for you there, so don't go away. The power of being abolished, expected much of what you said today, didn't expect such a call to action. So thank you very much. We're going to move on to Rosalie, who is the Public Health Lead for Drugs, Alcohol and Tobacco at Derbyshire County Council. And she's also a member of the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs. And I consider her to be one of the sector's expert commissioners. And I know that she has a particular interest in residential treatment. So I think we're very lucky to hear from her today. Over to you, Rosalie.
Thank you, Karen. What a glowing recommendation. I feel I've got a lot to live up to now. So I'm currently the Public Health Lead for Alcohol and Drugs at Derbyshire County Council. And as Karen has said, I am on ACND and a member of that recovery committee, but I'm not speaking in that capacity today, and I just need to make that very clear. I previously worked in probation and for National Offender Management Service, and I was also a charity chief executive, a provider charity. So hopefully I do bring perspectives from different parts of the sector to this conversation. I've had lots of experience over a number of years of residential rehab placements. I was a community care assessor back in the day when social workers did that. And I'm currently chairing the working group on Tier 4 for the relatively newly formed English Substance Use Commissioner group. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So my current role with Derbyshire County Council, I'm going to talk mainly with that kind of hat on really today. We commission framework contracts for our inpatient detox and our resi rehab. We've got probably about 10, it varies depending on COVID pressures on different providers, 10 inpatient detoxes and about 16 resi rehab providers. We've got no inpatient detox facility within our county and only one very small specialist resi rehab. So most of our residents will need to go out of county for most of their placements. Inpatient detox is actually relatively straightforward for us. Having a variety of different units actually really helps for us with increased access. We've commissioned it so that it's local-ish to home. Derbyshire is quite a big rural geographical county, and so we asked for any detox units to be within about an hour of the border of Derbyshire, so people didn't have to travel too far for what's a relatively short placement. And because we've got a variety of different providers, we've got reduced waiting time. So if somewhere is quite full, we can look at somewhere else for people so they don't have to wait too long. We do also try to have inpatient detox in-house if people are also going to rehab. Obviously, some rehabs have got their own detoxes that they can use, and others have got more local ones which we can access as well. Recognising that it's not massively helpful to have to travel 2, 3, 4, 5 hours from your detox to your resi rehab placement. And just on that note, really, resi rehab for us is actually all over the country. So the formal preparation work is undertaken by our community treatment services. And we put into place about 5 years ago, when we took the budget over from our adult care service, a very different approach really to how we were going to look at funding resi rehab. We have a fairly formalised programme that the community treatment provider undertakes with individuals, and we can do that on an individual basis or within groups. We try to do it within groups to try and give people an experience of being in a group to prepare them for rehab. But obviously, again, as we're a very big county, you don't necessarily have enough people in each area to be able to do that. So we will do that on an individual basis as well. And obviously with the last year with COVID, that's definitely been more of a challenge to do groups. They then, the client themselves will then attend funding panel, and I know that's usually raises some eyebrows amongst people, but that was my call actually, and I took that decision because I was very conscious that previously we had a key worker turn up with an armful of files to a panel. They may not know the person individually and say, this is what I've been given to say to you about why this person deserves their funding. And it all felt a little bit anonymous really, and not really owned by the client. And so we've changed it so that the client themselves comes to the funding panel. And we do recognise that that can be a very nervous time for them. And we do try very best to put them at their ease. I mean, all of us have worked with clients before, so I hope that, you know, we're not too scary. And we do give people some space. They're allowed to bring a supporter with them, so whether that's a family member. They'll have their key worker there anyway, but they could bring another worker, a mental health support worker, for example. And what we're looking for in that conversation is, what we're not asking for is for them to perform. We don't want them to kind of convince us that they deserve their funding, but what we're trying to ascertain is what we've termed the triangle approach, which for us is the right person, right place at the right time. And so we're looking for, is this person fully prepared? Do they understand enough about rehab? And do they understand where they're going, why they've chosen that particular rehab, what they're going to be doing when they get there? It's not going to be a spa, it's not going to be a boot camp. We get all and everything in between. Do they actually understand what their week, what their day is going to look like, and how they're going to benefit from that? We've done that because what we want to do is try to ensure that if people go, they stay. I think for us, we really feel that if someone goes and doesn't stay, they probably shouldn't have gone at all. Because if people leave, particularly if they leave early, they have often in their heads, as much as we try to dissuade them of this, rehab is the silver bullet. It is the one thing that they've worked towards that's going to work. And if that doesn't work, there's this huge sense of failure on the part of that person, which is very dangerous for people, because if that hasn't worked, then nothing is going to work. This is what it comes across within their heads. And they often then go downhill much quicker. And then the risk of relapse is incredibly high, the risk of accidental overdose incredibly high, and losing all hope and aspiration, and we don't want that. So we'd rather ask people to wait a little bit longer and be better prepared and get this triangle thing right, than for them to go quickly, go early and leave. We'd rather they didn't do that. So that's what we're aiming for in the funding panel. We rarely actually turn down a placement flat. I think I can only recall one in 5 years where we've actually said we don't think you're suitable for rehab at all. Sometimes we'll ask them to go away, think about it and come back the following month. And that's usually because of the choice of rehab. We have a broad selection of different kinds of rehabs on our framework, a very broad selection of different philosophies, different approaches. So we've got dual diagnosis, mental health, we've got highly qualified, skilled therapy programs, we've got male only, female only, we've so a real variety, 12 steps, TCs, everything. And so we want to make sure we get the best fit for that client. And sometimes when they present to us, you know, even though we're commissioners, we do know what we're talking about, and we kind of look at them and think, I think you might have chosen the wrong one, and we just want you to go back and have a look. We're not saying you have to go anywhere. We're not going to make you go anywhere you don't want to go, but could you just go away and have a look with your worker and have a look at another rehab that we think might suit you better? And I would say 9 times out of 10, they come back and say, yeah, we've had a look at that one and we think that one would work for us better. So that's helpful. We can also go off framework if needed, and that's probably worth saying, in that if there's a specific need that someone has that isn't met on our framework, then that's fine to go off framework and to pick a different rehab, and we're very happy to do that. So it's quite an individualised approach, I suppose, that we have really. And we don't have a lot of criteria other than coming through the treatment service and having done the prep work. To be honest, over 18, misusing alcohol or drugs, and that's self-defined. That's kind of it really. We don't ask people to have jumped through hoops. We don't ask people to have done so many different kinds of treatment in the community or have been in treatment for a certain amount of time. Our view is very much, if someone needs rehab, why make them wait 3 years, do all the things we have in the community, and they still need rehab at the end of 3 years? Let's just do rehab now. So that's very much our approach. So we've had people who've been in service for 2 months and came into service knowing that they wanted rehab, and that's what they've worked towards, and we've said yes. And we've had people who've been in service for 20 years and come to us and finally got to that point. Our opportunities and challenges. For us, we have a demand-led budget, which is an absolute nightmare to manage. So not only do we not know who's going to come to us and how many are going to come to us, and we don't know how long they're going to stay. So trying to manage that budget year in, year out is a real challenge. So over and underspending is an issue. We usually underspend. We have a very healthy budget in Derbyshire for both inpatient detox and resi rehab. And we usually underspend on it, although 1920 we came very close to overspending on our resi rehab budget, which caused panics from our accountancy department, but we were fine. Interestingly, and this might be quite different for other local authorities, Derbyshire, we fund for 6 months placements. And I am absolutely committed and passionate about that 6-month period. The people that we're seeing who come to funding panel are people who need time, and they need a good, solid, proper programme, and they need space to be able to do that. It is a bit of a challenge when they go to programmes and their peers are only staying for 3 months, and then they say, well, why do I need to stay for 6? Because they're only staying for 3. But we would always encourage people to use that funding that we have for 6 months and to utilise that fully and take the opportunities that are available to them to do that. Our key workers in our community treatment services are absolutely key to successful outcomes, not just in doing the preparation, which is critical, but supporting the matching of the client to the rehab, encouraging them, motivating them, not letting their own views about different philosophies influence. So they might have a particular view about 12 steps. Actually, that's not their call as a key worker to have that view for their client. Their role is to support their client in what works for them. We have a number of key workers who've got their own experiences of treatment and rehab. That is interesting, but not always relevant. And it's about the client that's in front of you. And we expect them to know more than 1 or 2 rehabs on the list. We expect them to understand all the rehabs on the list, because that is the only way that they could fully advise and support their client. We wouldn't expect someone to come into a key worker role and say, I don't understand about prescribing services, so I'm not going to talk to them about that. We expect them to know about that. So we do have quite a big ask of our community treatment services. An issue we have, returners, people who like going to rehab and they come back to us and they come back to panel and we remember them and say, hello, nice to see you again. What happened there? And so we have people who have had very short experiences of rehab and realise their mistake and want to come back. We have people who fully complete a rehab and then a year later come back and say, I'd like to do a different one or another one or the same one. And so that is a real challenge for us about how we manage our budget effectively, because by saying yes to someone again, we are effectively saying no to someone should we overspend on that budget, and that's a real challenge for us. Aftercare and support, not necessarily from the rehab, although because we fund 6-month placements, a lot of our clients don't return to Derbyshire. They often will stay in the area of the rehab. So it doesn't have to necessarily be from the rehab, but understanding what is put in place for discharge from the rehab and making sure there's a good aftercare plan. In terms of COVID, challenges around that, people being stuck because of lack of move-on housing and therefore having to fund longer placements. We've had have had issues about fewer people wanting to go to rehab. So I think funding this year is not reflective in this financial year of our previous years, and it's been a real challenge really around that. I think, and I'm not speaking for commissioners, but speaking for myself actually, and I have an understanding of the Tier 4 sector and I really want to support it, but actually I don't feel like my role is to prop it up. And so I have to balance the fact that I've got public money that I need to be accountable for, but I also have a responsibility to our local residents to give them what they need. And sometimes that might be a residential placement, it might be Tier 4, but actually sometimes it might not be. And I'll go on to talk a little bit about alternatives as well. And so we've got this Tier 4 work stream with the English Substance Misuse Commissioner Group, which is looking to develop best practice information for commissioners and coming together. And, it's a really broad field when it comes to Tier 4. And we're also working with Karen regarding the Rehab Online web information that's available to people. And I think that'll be a really positive start really to kind of working with the sector. As I said, I'm not really here to explain anything about other commissioning decisions and other local authorities, and I'm not here to apologise or to congratulate them either. But I just wanted to touch finally on some possible reasons why there might be issues around using Tier 4 services that might be helpful to this webinar today, for people on this webinar. Some areas have very, very, very small numbers of people in treatment, actually then you have even smaller numbers of people that would necessarily want to go to residential treatment. So it's worth bearing that in mind when you're comparing local authorities. You're not comparing like with like. You're comparing ones like us, which has big county council areas, with tiny local authority areas. So for example, even in East Midlands, Rutland is tiny area and tiny numbers of people in treatment. You can't really compare us when it comes to people sending people on placements. So the smaller the local authority areas, the smaller their treatment budgets overall, and therefore that's not taken into account when you look at the cost of an individual placement in a rehab. So up to £25,000 for a person, that doesn't reduce just because you're a smaller area or you've got a smaller budget. And so that could be a huge chunk of someone's whole treatment budget to send people to resi rehab. So I'd just like to think about that when you're wanting to call out my colleagues in their different local authority areas for not sending people. And it's fair to say, and Peter's covered this really, that there have been budget cuts for local authorities around the public health grant, and some have actually suffered far more than others. And in those cases, something genuinely has to give. And so I would ask you to be kind and think with compassion about actually when we're trying to make decisions in local authorities about who gets money. Do we take money away from children safeguarding and neglect? Do we take money away from domestic abuse? Do we take money away from drug users? Do we take money away? There's a lot of decisions to actually make on this. And I would say, having spoken to a lot of people in my position, we're doing the best we can. We can always do better, but we are doing the best we can. There is a development really of some quite robust and popular kind of what I'd call quasi rehab in the community day programme type approaches. And I think in some cases people have felt that they've not necessarily replaced the need to go to rehab, but they have offered a very good alternative for people who don't necessarily want to move away and want to stay at home and do that. And so I think some areas that maybe don't send many people to rehab probably have very, very good quasi day programme rehab in the community programmes. And so this is not about we need to spend X percentage of our budget on this number of people to go to rehab. This is about actually what delivers the best outcomes for our populations. What do they get? I'm very much a believer in, and one size doesn't fit all. So I like to have access to everything to make sure that people can have that choice on that. But I would just say that, you know, some rehab in the community programs have been very popular and have done very well. There is a history in some areas of not using rehab very much at all. And the evidence base for effectiveness around that is not necessarily very easy to find. And so if you're looking to make that change and looking to make that argument, we need to have more money to invest in tier 4 treatments. It can be more difficult to find that in a way that is accessible and makes your argument around that. Different programs, rehab particularly has a really broad philosophy of different approaches, which I think is great, and it's good because you can match people to that. But actually, is one better than the other? Does one suit more people than the other? And trying to pin that down can be more tricky to do that. If you've not got history and an understanding of residential treatment, then that can be more difficult to make that argument and put that all together. To make it clear, you know, what the differences are, what are we paying for, and are the outcomes any better for X over Y? And of course, there are finally some commissioning differences. So some areas, the commissioners retain the tier 4 budget like we do. And so we have oversight over inpatient detox and resi rehab. And others have passed that all to their community treatment provider for them to undertake those tier 4 options. And so there are differences amongst that. And as Peter said earlier, that those differences, that localism is built into the way local authorities work. It's deliberate, but it does produce some variances, which I know can be frustrating for people. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalie. I think a number of the issues that you covered are reflective of the conversations that many have had around the use of rehab and the challenges that exist across the country. And, you know, all credit to you. You've represented Derbyshire, but you've also given them a go at representing some of that multiplicity of views across commissioners. So I'd encourage us all to respect Rosalie's presentation of some of those issues aren't necessarily what her practice. I'm going to move on to Jon, and there are plenty of questions coming through in the chat and the Q&A. So I want to make sure that we do have time to be able to address some of those themes at the very least. So Jon is Service Manager at Avon and Wiltshire Mental Health Partnership Trust. He's chair of the NHS Inpatient Network, and that group has campaigned really hard on the need for adequate funding for inpatient detox. So it's a pleasure to welcome him today to speak about the importance of detox provision. Jon, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Karen. Can you nod if you can hear me okay? Is the sound okay? Great, thanks very much. Hi everybody, really pleased to be here, and thanks to Oliver for inviting us along and to get a really truly sort of sector-wide perspective on the situation at the moment. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Karen. I'm Jon Shorrock. I work in the Southwest for Avon and Wiltshire Mental Health Partnership Trust. I've been in the sector for probably about 25 years, I think, at last count. And I was really delighted when I took up the post in Bristol as the service manager here, and I had an inpatient unit. Having worked in other areas of the country and not having access to that, it was like I'd found a gold tap that actually did pour gold out a bit. So I was absolutely delighted. And then quite quickly, the austerity hit, and I realised that actually my main purpose is going to be trying to keep the unit alive. And that's pretty much how it's been since, I would say, particularly sort of like 2016. So the last 4 years have been a real struggle. So I'm just going to share my screen. 2 seconds, guys. I'm hoping people can see that. Bear with me a second. Right, so all the buttons are at the top. Okay, so I'm just going to run through this presentation. For those of you that joined the NHS Alliance conference in September, some of the slides are repetitive, but they have been updated. But I do want to focus on what we've done and how we're trying to turn the problem into a solution. and obviously some greater opportunities with the funding that has been announced. So, but just to kind of give a bit of a background for you guys. So, you know, since the Andrew Lansley Health and Social Care Act, really, you know, we have seen a major decline. And, you know, in 2008, there were 8 NHS detox provision in London. There are now none. And there are only 5 left across the country, with a small group of them in the northwest, and then 1 in Kent and 1 in Bristol, where we are. We are trying to do another piece of work to look at actually what has been the overall impact. And at the moment, our early findings are we think there were 21 NHS units in 2008, and as I say, we're down to 5. I'm not going to go over what we've been saying before, but I do think it's really interesting what Pete's been saying about perhaps earmarking around 15% of budget for Tier 4. I think an old NTA document actually stated 10%. We also, I think, have felt that as the budgets have devolved down into providers, there's been less scrutiny on those budgets, and at times may even have been used to prop up the Tier 3, so further reducing the opportunity for monies for Tier 4. This is an interesting and important slide. And this came from Professor Colin Drummond and Phillips et al. And they really did do a piece of work that actually shows a link between the decline. So if we look at this line here in the specialist prescribing, which is largely inpatient detox, and then acute hospital admissions going up. So there's almost a correlation between the two things. And the spend here is far greater than the spend here. So in terms of an economic argument, it doesn't make any sense at all. This is probably out of date, but it's worth noting. And I think the sector as a whole has upped its game. But actually 2009, 77% of the inpatient units were deemed good. And by 2017, 72% were seen as unsafe. And please don't, I'm not making a case here to say that NHS are good, others are not good, but actually, because I think a lot of work has gone on since that time, but it's an important thing for us to know. This is really what I just want to, why are we different? Well, it is the depth and strength of our expert and our staffing that we have. But not only that, I really wanted to focus on this. We do sit at the top of the pyramid. I think there's a perception sometimes that all detoxes are the same. The reason we're able to manage the most acute is because we're consultant-led, hospital-based, and actually being hospital-based and part of the NHS taps us into a whole network of the NHS and the on-call systems as well. We see very few blue-lighted individuals, coming off our units. We are able to manage the acuity because of the experts that we have, and also the kind of infrastructure that we are tapped into. So we do sit very much at the top of the pyramid. You remove that bit of the pyramid, and health inequalities for a small but very significant number of people increases massively. I'm not going to go over this because this is largely well known. I really want to focus my discussion here or presentation on where we're going to. So moving from the kind of problem to the solutions. Really, the current system just has not been working. Spot purchases, we are all precarious. All 5 of us NHS units remain precarious financially. And the welcome funding will give us some security for another 12 months, but beyond that, we still don't know, as is the case for many others. So what do we do? I hear collaboration being used a lot through this presentation, and I think that has been absolutely key. I think the fact that, first of all, we are all part of the NHS Addiction Provider Alliance. The Addiction Provider Alliance has made massive strides in terms of supporting the sector and supporting the lobbying voice. We created a subgroup as a result of the alliance called the Inpatient Network. And we only had one real main objective, although we were looking at quality issues at the same time. But our objective was to find a sustainable funding solution. So the fact that we all came together and we are all were united in terms of trying to find this sustainable funding gave us great strength. And we developed a robust business case which was packed with case studies, again, showing the acuity of the work that we do, that we felt made us a good candidate for specialist commissioning. We have made application for that, and we're waiting to hear the outcome. We also did, as Karen said, we also made sure that we started a campaign which started back in August of last year. So we've really been trying to champion for on behalf of the NHS Inpatient Network, but much more broadly, also for inpatient per se, and even for the Tier 4 budgets as well. So our communication company, Bright Sparks, have been putting out regular features through social media and also through mainstream media as well, which I think we could probably say, I think, you know, in part at least, you know, the funding that has been earmarked for inpatient we have had some success in making our voice heard. And secondly, I think, you know, we've raised our profile, and the challenge that the units face through, you know, Collective Voice have been very supportive. Other charitable organisations as well, and actually we've got very good traction with the Dane Carroll Black review part 2. So overall, you know, it has been through a galvanised and collective voice that has been really well strategically developed to make sure that our key messages are being heard and that the vulnerability of the units is fully understood. And I think that has got a growing knowledge. And we are equally sympathetic to the wider Tier 4 sector as well. And these are really where we're at. And this slide was prepared for the English Substance Use Commissioning Group, actually, before the £80 million was announced. So I was, you know, looking at this and reflecting on it. And it's really interesting when we come to the last point, because we were that's where we were steering things towards. So we're all hopeful that the Dane Carroll Black Review will lead to some, you know, long-term sustained funding that will equally support the Tier 4. We have tried to work through our local sustainable transformation programmes and integrated care systems to find local and regional solutions, but limited success. Some areas have, Manchester and Stoke do. And we do have the submission for specialist commissioning, which is being progressed. But we also were proposing that we might look at some regional funding models for Tier 4, and we proposed that we use the NHS as a vehicle for that. So that's interesting, because obviously that's where we are being, you know, in terms of the extra monies, it is being directed in that direction. So new money, problem solved? Clearly not. But again, we celebrate the you know, the additional funding. You know, I think we really celebrate as well that, you know, there is actually quite a substantial amount of money earmarked per PHE region for this. I think obviously the 1 year makes it tricky, but we're hopeful that it's part of a, you know, an upward picture, and that the spending review brings more. But I do think, just as a model for regional commissioning, it is great. We are trying to work up a kind of service specification in the background to present to commissioners as a blueprint. I think that needs to go out for consultation at some point. But you know, I want to finish really by saying, yes, we feel that the you know, situation in the future does look brighter. And certainly, if we can keep a very clear spend for the Tier 4 areas and have those protected within budgets, then I think we will all look better going forward, supported by a regional commissioning approach. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think it's helpful to hear at the end the impact that some fairly heavy NHS campaigning has done to support additional funding for inpatient detox. So we have loads of questions and I'm going to try and bring them together. So I'm going to go with the first set of 3. And I've tried to bring together the themes, and Oliver's been helping me in the background, bring together the themes of some of the conversations that have happened over the course of the whole morning. So we're keeping both panels open, and I will field them to individuals, but if there's anyone else that wants to respond, physically stick your hand up and then I'll be able to see you. So the first three questions are: how do we improve the evidence base? How do we ensure that the money, new money, gets through to improve access to residential treatment? And the next one is a bit big, but how does the current provision sufficiently meet individual needs? Lots of reference to specific communities, mental health needs, and the needs of people with in different age groups. So I'm giving you advance warning of those first three questions. I'll come back to the first one: how do we improve the evidence base? That was mostly in response to your talk, Rosalie, so I'll come to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think it's quite difficult, isn't it? I remember there was a seminar that you were at, Karen, at Sheffield Hallam 3 years ago, maybe, and we had people, academics there, who'd gone through, I think it was David Best and his team, had looked at the evidence base really around residential rehab, and specifically around TCs, but not exclusively so. And a lot of the formalised research was US based, which just doesn't translate very well over here, because we just don't have the same healthcare services and the same funding mechanisms and massive amounts of 12-step treatment in the States, which isn't replicated all here. And it was quite tricky to navigate really through that. I mean, I think we need some really good research that looks at cohorts of people, who does well in what settings, and that would really help us, because I've worked in this sector for a long time, and I've assessed people for rehab for a very long time. And the one thing I'm certain of is that I am worse now at knowing who is going to complete residential treatment than I was 20 years ago. Yeah. I'm absolutely rubbish at it, because the people I would stake my house on leave within a week, and the people that I just think, well, we'll say yes, but you've got no chance, do brilliantly well and are just superb. And so I don't think we're very good at matching, and I'd like to be better at matching, because I'd like people to do well and like people to access the right treatment for them, and achieve their potential and achieve recovery that's sustainable for them. So some kind of research that would look at that would help us. I mean, it's never going to be 100%, because people will do what people will do, and we can't read people's minds and we can't predict in that way, but something that matches treatment philosophies, approaches, length of stay, all those things, what works well, and how can we prepare people better, and how can we do that better? That would be the kind of research I would love to see.
Thank you, Rosalie. Annemarie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think obviously investing in recovery research is vitally important. Like, I couldn't even fill my desk in Glasgow here with the amount of stuff that we know about recovery, and it seems insane to me not to be studying the solution. You know, there's a whole cohort, probably an estimated like 750,000 people in recovery in the UK, you know, so we should definitely be investing in funding that research. But when it comes to who's going to get well, you know, and how can we measure that, and how can we assess risk for that, or how can we predict that, I don't think that's possible. As a person in long-term recovery, I would say to Rosalie exactly the same. Like, I don't know when somebody approaches the rooms, for instance, or the 12-step fellowships, who's going to get well and who's not going to get well. I couldn't take a bet on that at all, and I genuinely don't think research is going to help with that. I think what our job is and what we need to do as a profession is make sure that people have access to all the different pathways to recovery, and that's the only thing we should be focusing on. We should be keeping it really simple and focusing on access and choice for people, and not punishing them when one pathway doesn't work for them. I know there's money involved, but we're worth it.
I think Chair's privilege on this. If you look across any other health or social care sector, we are really good. It's not so much the circling the wagons, but we're really good at beating ourselves up about this, and it's the impact of stigma on our sector. And I think we're identifying an action point for us, but also a challenge in behaviour for ourselves as a sector. Pete, do you want to add? There's some comment around what's PHE's role in this. Do you want to contribute anything to this one question around the evidence base? You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it does need more focus, and it does need more sustained funding, and it definitely needs a more of a focus on recovery. But I also agree with some of the other sentiments that we're a long way from what we do know as well. So, you know, we shouldn't let that distract us from that. I absolutely get Rosalie's point about sort of, there's a lot of things I've wasted a lot of time in my career on, and one of them was sort of going after that patient placement criteria research question, and it is a bit unanswerable, and we did spend quite a lot of time and effort and money to little return, unfortunately. But we completely, you know, we did it because we felt the same as you, Rosalie, that's what we really need to know. But I think it is, as Annemarie said, it is on research, you know, we're not going to get there. So I think there is also, you know, just giving up some things as understanding that perhaps they're fool's gold, and, you know, moving on and understanding what it is that we do know and getting closer to that. But hopefully out of Dame Carol Black, there's going to be recommendations in there about more, you know, long-term sustainable research and more of a focus on recovery.
Rosalie, you did just put your hand up just quickly, and then we'll come on
just
to
very quickly, just to say, I suppose the issue is for looking at the spend of money, do we spend 25k on a key worker, or do we spend 25k on one client going to rehab? So if there's anything that can help us to make better decisions about that, that would be really helpful, because we don't have an unlimited pot. So just something that would help us, guide us more towards that. A key worker that can help 60 people, or one person going to rehab. What do we do? What do we spend it on? Everybody's worth it. And I take Annemarie's point, but everybody's worth it. But we don't have money for everybody. So what do we do to make a best decision for us, really? We allow anybody who wants to go to rehab to come to panel. We don't put any criteria on that, but it's not easy.
Let's campaign for more money.
So on that point, we've got a little bit more money. And lots of questions around this, how do we ensure that gets where it's intended? I'm coming to Pete first on this, because you've been really open and honest on this. Appreciate there's very little levers that you as PHE have, but talk about us as a system. How do we ensure that gets where where it's intended?
I mean, I think what's about to come out about the money is as much interference as we feel that we can do, and it's the most interference for the last 25, 15 years. But we're not going to. We're also really mindful that we can make an awful mess of this, and that too much central government and removing too much local autonomy and too much local decision making will make an absolute pig's ear. So, what we've tried to do is put some shape into this. The most direct and incisive bit of shape is we've just cut out a bit for inpatient detox. I actually think that residential rehab will do very well within the universal component, because I started with Andy 30 years ago. It's 30 years, Andy, and where you had in-year money, unfortunately, it may be short term, but the first thing you reach for is residential rehab, because you can mobilise it quickly. The capacity is there. So I think existing capacity next year in residential rehab, I think it will have a good year. But we're not going to, but it is, and it kind of links into the longer question. The $1 million question is what's the right balance between standards and national determination and local determination? Because clearly local determination is where the magic happens. But what we've also learned is it can be where some of the disasters happen as well. So where do you get the balance right? And we've put down some markers for this 80 million, but the real question is, what does that balance look like in the longer term? But I think we just got to be mindful. We can make some horrendous mistakes nationally by taking too much control, and locally is where the magic happens. But there needs to be parameters. Fundamentally, there needs to be enough money, doesn't there? That's the.
Yeah. Any other comments on how do we ensure the money gets where it should?
Karen, I think it comes back to that. Where is the oversight and scrutiny on these budgets? And that how is that then scrutinised? I do think the commissioner oversight on this. We've had conversations with commissioners who said, I don't know how much we're spending after we've devolved it to providers, and I don't think that's an acceptable response. I think, you know, if it is devolved, then commissioners need to have a tight handle on where it's being spent and the effectiveness with which that money is being provided. So for me, it is about making sure that there is clear earmarked funding for particular areas such as tier 4, and what are the monitoring. And I think Pete's alluded to both, to saying that those, you know, they both will be a requirement. So for me, I think that starts to get things into a better place.
I agree, and we also have a number of groups now that we didn't have previously that have got really focused attention on that. So Rosalie mentioned the commissioners group. There is a collective voice tier 4 group as well. So I think we're providing ourselves with an opportunity to be able to have that appropriate level of focus and challenge. But it is in our hands. Rosalie, did you want to add something?
Just to say, some of the difficulties we've had is that because we have healthy budgets already, we didn't necessarily need the money to be spent on those things. So to have that earmarked for us to say you will spend X amount of money on inpatient detox, well, we've already got money for inpatient detox. We never spend all of it. We're very happy to spend it. We don't need it. So we were happy to give our allocation up to other areas that actually have no access to tier 4, because we think that's a much better use. You know, let's be altruistic, but actually we don't need it and other people might. But that wasn't an option for us. So we've had to say, we'll take the money then, because otherwise it wouldn't go anywhere. And so that's quite tricky. So I think what we need to see, don't we, is this kind of minimum levelling up standard across the board, so that everybody, wherever they live, has access, rather than a pot of money comes to you, you must spend it on X. So there's 15% on Resi Rehab. We don't need 15% extra of our budget. We've got a very healthy rehab budget, but other areas that have got nothing, they really need that. They really need that money. So Pete's right, you know, it's that balance, isn't it, of a national approach that says, you know, we want to give this money out, we want to see everything get better, but the way you do it sometimes causes more problems. It's hard.
Thank you.
Can I just come back about that, because you're absolutely right, and just to be clear on that, the 15% on Resi Rehab out of the universal, that's indicative. That's there's no, you know, that's just like, you know, a suggestion. But like I say, I actually think the Resi Rehab will do. People who haven't got it, I think it will do well out of this funding for next year. But in relation to the inpatient detox, I mean, we've taken a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and quite unapologetically, really. And that will, some areas it won't work for them and they won't like it. But we've just had to weigh up the balances of the greater good. But you know, I don't think there'll be anything quite as decisive as that ever again. I think this is probably a unique moment. Yeah.
Thank you, Pete. Right, we've got less than a few minutes left, but I do want us to provide us with an opportunity to answer this range of questions around the and it's a little bit linked to the matching. Does current provision sufficiently meet the needs of a range of different communities? So people from different communities, people with mental health issues, people from different age groups. Hannah, do you want to have a go at this first?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the short answer is no. We, from Trevi's point of view, our sort of particular issue has always been about women. And I feel that over the last 10 years, we've made a lot of headway in being able to recognise that the services were set up around, drug services were set up around the needs of men. And actually, it wasn't a case of just sort of tagging on a women-only drop-in. Actually, you had to design services around the needs of women. And I feel that we've sort of made some real ground, and now we're starting to have some other conversations about the needs of other groups. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement has really brought this it's a sector to the whole of us. It's a nationwide conversation, but I think it's a really important one to have within our sector. And we've certainly been having some of those quite challenging conversations, challenging ourselves as leaders in the sector. What are we doing to not be tick box in our approach, and not to say, you know, we'll do this on a Thursday. Actually, it has to be meaningful, and it has to be, the different communities have to be at the heart of some of that thinking. And I feel like we're certainly from Trevi's point of view, we're on that journey, but I think as a sort of a sector, we've still got a long way to go, but we're a sector that is, in terms of trying to reach communities, that's what we're built on doing, trying to sort of hear people who aren't always being heard. So I think we've got a lot of the ingredients, but we're starting a journey that needs to be done. Thank you.
And just finally, Andy, is there anything from your experience of being able to find suitable residential treatment for the range of people that you are able to offer treatment to?
I think for us, there is a variety, which is good. I think some of it is about having specialists, which I think there's a need for. I think sometimes that there is a need. I think we find individual treatment placements just great to work with. So when we're sending someone who's been rough sleeping for the last 12 months and stuff, there has to be a slight understanding. Some people do want something a bit more kind of practical stuff based rather than therapeutic, and understanding that pace of change, I think, is really important. But there's never going to be a particular placement for every single type of person. And I think, looking for that difference, looking for that flexibility for me is, and that collaboration is important.
Thank you. Maybe specialist provision is another topic for another webinar. We have really come to the end. There are loads of questions. I'm going to task, as I'm wittering on bringing this to a close, the panelists to see if they can answer as many as they can in the Q&A as we come to a close. It's left for me to say thank you so much, panelists. As I said, I've been in sector 14 years, a spring chicken compared to many, but I can't remember another focused conversation on tier 4 provision. I think we've definitely had a call to action. I think it's been the start of a conversation within the sector, a mature conversation around the role of residential treatment and detox. And I think we all need to continue that conversation to understand how we can deliver system change, because if there's a conclusion from today, I think that's clearly what it is. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to everyone that has attended. As I said, this is a part of a series being run by Collective Voice. And we are creating some resource, a blog and a set of resource materials. So the team will do that following this webinar, and keep an eye on your favourite social media platforms for more webinars that will come from Collective Voice. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and we will continue the conversation another time. Thank you.